He thought she was already dead, but when he leaned closer, he noticed the faint movement of her chest, a light, almost imperceptible breathing. That moment became fateful. Instead of stopping, the man carried out what he had started. Seconds of despair turned into brutal murder. The story of the family at the center of a criminal case seemed, at first glance, no different from thousands of others. A man and woman lived in a small American town, raising children and trying to maintain their home and family. To their neighbors, they were an ordinary couple. They went shopping together, showed up at parties, and sometimes argued in public, but there was nothing to indicate the constant tension lurking behind closed doors. The husband worked in manufacturing. The work was hard and didn't bring in enough income, which irritated him. His wife looked after the house and occasionally earned extra money, but he considered her contribution to the family budget insignificant. He reproached her for being idle, refusing to accept excuses that caring for the children and the household required effort. Gradually, these reproaches became a regular part of their conversations. Over the years, the conflicts intensified. The man had a fiery temper and couldn't control his emotions. He would raise his voice over trivial things, an unclear table, a late dinner, or a phone call from his wife. Suspicion also grew. He was jealous of her colleagues and acquaintances, even a friend she socialized with. There was no evidence of infidelity, but the accusations became regular. Alcohol made matters worse. After heavy shifts, he often drank at home or at a bar, and upon returning, he looked for a reason to quarrel. When drunk, his temper escalated into aggression. The woman tried to avoid conversation, retreating to another room, sometimes spending the night at her parents', but returning soon after. It seemed normal to her, tolerating and not airing dirty laundry in public. Family friends later recalled that the wife complained about her husband's harshness and spoke of her fear of his outbursts. She hinted that he had once hit her, but no one paid any attention to her words at the time. To those around her, it seemed like ordinary family difficulties. Meanwhile, financial problems only mount. The husband considered himself responsible for the family, but felt hopeless. He said his work wasn't appreciated, that the family wasn't living the way they should. At such moments, his wife became the target of his accusations. Neighbors noted that the man seemed particularly irritated several weeks before the tragedy. They heard loud arguments and saw him react harshly to his wife, even in public. One incident stood out. He threw an object against the wall when she tried to calm him down on the street. But no one reported it to the police. It was considered a private matter. The woman didn't seek help from the authorities or support services. She didn't file complaints or discuss the situation with authorities. For her, it was all part of a marriage from which she saw no escape. Patience and silence became her strategy, although this was precisely what allowed the conflict to escalate to its limits. By the time of the tragedy, the family was living in an atmosphere of constant tension. Every new day could end in another argument. The husband felt irritated and helpless, the wife fearful and tired. Everything was heading toward an explosion, which was bound to happen sooner or later. That morning was unremarkable. The husband went to work, and his wife stayed home with the usual chores: cleaning, making phone calls, and shopping. Their conversation over breakfast was brief but tense. The husband again chided his wife for wasting money on trifles and not thinking about the future. The woman remained silent, and this silence only increased her irritation. They barely spoke during the day. According to colleagues, the man looked tired and irritated, complaining about fatigue and money. That evening, he returned home later than usual, having stayed late at the bar. The smell of alcohol was detectable in his pockets, and from the moment he entered, he began looking for a reason to quarrel. The trigger was a phone call from his wife. She was talking to a friend about household matters, but her husband took this as evidence of secret meetings. His jealousy flared instantly. He began shouting, accusing her of infidelity and disrespect, demanding an explanation. His wife tried to calm him down, but her words only fueled the conflict. The argument escalated into open violence. The husband pushed his wife, then grabbed her arms, preventing her from moving. A fight broke out in the house. the sound of furniture falling and screaming. The children hid in their room, afraid to come out. The woman tried to break free, but was physically outmatched by her husband. The blows, delivered in anger, caused her to lose her balance and hit her head. For a moment, the house was silent. The man looked at his wife lying there and decided she was dead. Panicked, he began to consider what to do next, call an ambulance or hide the incident. At that moment, he noticed the woman's chest rising slightly. She was still breathing. This detail proved decisive. The man, enraged and intoxicated, didn't stop. He took it as a necessity to finish the job. Grabbing a handy object, he struck again, depriving his wife of any chance of survival. It all happened in a matter of minutes, without thought, like a continuation of what had already been done. Afterwards, he tried to tidy up the house. He put things away, mopped the floor, and covered up the bloodstains. His actions were chaotic, but decisive. He realized the situation was spiraling out of control and tried to leave as little evidence as possible. The children remained in the next room and heard only fragments of what was happening. They would later tell police that their father was screaming and their mother fell silent too quickly. They didn't see the body that evening. The man locked the door and forbade them from leaving. Late that night, he left the house, leaving the children asleep. According to investigators, he tried to concoct an alibi, stopping at a store to create the appearance of a normal evening. But upon returning, he realized it would be difficult to conceal what had happened. A heavy silence reigned inside the house. The wife was dead, and the husband already realized he had crossed the line. However, at that moment, he was only concerned with one thing: how to avoid punishment. After his wife stopped showing signs of life, the man was in shock. He knew what had happened could no longer be undone, but he desperately tried to figure out how to cover up the murder. His first thought was to dispose of the body, but he couldn't bring himself to do so that night. His children were in the house, and neighbors might notice his late-night activities. He carefully wiped away the blood stains, moving furniture to conceal the damage. He placed some items in bags, planning to remove them later. His actions were chaotic. He hid items, then returned them. Stains remained on his hands and clothes, which he hastily washed away. The next morning, the man acted as if nothing had happened. He told the children that their mother had gone to visit relatives. However, they were alarmed by the fact that their mother's belongings were still at home. Her phone and bag were also still there, which looked suspicious. These details would later prove crucial to the investigation. During the day, he attempted to dispose of some evidence. According to the investigation, he took bags of clothes and rags to a nearby landfill, where he discarded them among the household trash. He burned some of the items in the yard late in the evening, hoping the neighbors wouldn't notice. However, several people noticed smoke and noted the strange behavior of their neighbor, who usually avoided open fires. A few days later, the wife's relatives began to worry. She wasn't answering calls, didn't show up for work, and hadn't contacted friends. Her husband assured her she was away on personal business and would return soon. But the lack of contact became increasingly suspicious. The woman's father was the first to file a missing person report with the police. He insisted that his daughter never left without warning, much less left the children unattended. The police launched an investigation. Routine phone calls to friends, inquiries at medical facilities and hotels. There was no evidence of her movements. The police officers visited the family's home. The man greeted them calmly, reporting that his wife had been irritated and had left the house after an argument. However, his explanation was unconvincing. The house smelled of household chemicals, and in some places, there were signs of overly thorough and recent cleaning. The police also took note of neighbors' statements. They said they heard loud screams and bangs on the day of the disappearance. One of them even noticed the man leaving the house after midnight with some packages. He answered questions curtly, trying to avoid conversation. Investigators were granted search warrants. During the inspection, small blood stains were discovered on the floor and furniture, which could not be completely concealed. Experts confirmed that the stains belonged to the woman. Another incriminating factor was the husband's inconsistencies. He initially claimed his wife had left in the evening, then said she had disappeared during the day. The children, despite being pressured by their father, nevertheless testified. They said that on the night of the argument, they heard screams and objects falling, and then silence. They didn't see their mother in the morning and never saw her again. This testimony provided indirect, but important evidence. With each passing day, the circle of suspicion narrowed. The man tried to remain calm, but his behavior betrayed nervousness. He avoided meeting with his wife's relatives, didn't answer calls, and spoke vaguely. His attempts to explain his disappearance seemed increasingly implausible. A week after his disappearance, police detained him for questioning. At this stage, investigators didn't yet have a full set of evidence, but inconsistencies in his statements, traces of blood, and witness testimony pointed to his direct involvement in the crime. The man denied murder. He claimed his wife had left voluntarily and that the blood was the result of an accidental injury. But the theory of voluntary departure seemed implausible. Not a single document or video recording confirmed that the woman had left the city. Thus began the phase of the investigation that finally destroyed the false alibi and led to the formal indictment. After his arrest, the man was taken to the police station, where investigators began his first formal interrogation. At this stage, they had only circumstantial evidence: his husband's contradictory statements, traces of blood in the house, and neighbors' accounts of quarrels. However, even these facts were sufficient to raise a suspicion of murder. The man was wary. He repeated the same story over and over. His wife had left after an argument, and he didn't know where she was. But investigators saw that the story crumbled over the details. When asked why his wife's things were left in the house, he gave a vague answer. His wife's phone was found in a desk drawer, a clear argument against the unauthorized departure theory. At the same time, forensic experts were working through evidence from the house. They found traces of blood on the carpet and furniture, which they attempted to remove with household chemicals. An examination determined that the blood belonged to the woman. Microfibers of fabric matching her clothing were found on the kitchen floor. This indicated that the violence occurred inside the house, not outside. Investigators carefully examined the alibi. The husband claimed to have visited the store on the night of his disappearance. Security footage confirmed his presence, but the time of the visit didn't match his account. Furthermore, the video showed the man appearing tense with scratched hands. The clerk later confirmed that the customer had been acting strangely, appeared rushed, and avoided eye contact. Particular attention was paid to neighbors. One testified that he saw the suspect carry out packages and bags on the night of the argument. Another reported a burning smell coming from the yard. These testimonies further confirmed the picture of concealed evidence. The couple's children also proved key witnesses. Despite intense emotional distress, they testified that they heard screams, bangs, and furniture falling. Then there was silence, and they never saw their mother again. For the investigators, these words became crucial confirmation of the theory of domestic violence. The evidence gathered was sufficient for the court to issue a full search warrant. A weapon with traces of blood was found in the garage. Bags of clothing and rags, including his wife's belongings, were found in nearby dumpsters. This evidence was presented to the suspect. Under pressure from the evidence, the man began to falter in his explanation. At first, he denied the murder, then claimed he had accidentally hit her. His story changed several times, but the essence remained the same. He was trying to shift blame to circumstances. Investigators realized they were dealing with a man determined to conceal the crime, but incapable of thinking through the details. After several days of interrogation, he was formally charged with murder. At that point, his lawyer advised him not to testify, but he managed to make several confessions, which were recorded and included in the case file. The public learned of the case through local media coverage. Headlines reported a brutal family murder, and local residents actively discussed the incident. Many expressed bewilderment. The family seemed normal on the surface, and no one expected such a tragedy. The investigation took several months. Experts presented a full report. The nature of the injuries indicated intentional actions, not an accident. Psychologists who worked with the children confirmed that they had witnessed the father's aggressive behavior. This evidence strengthened the prosecution's case. Once the case file was complete, the prosecutor announced his readiness to take the case to trial. The man remained in custody, as the risk of escape and witness tampering was deemed high. The arrest marked the final point of the investigation. Now came the trial, the stage where all the evidence would be presented and the final verdict rendered. The trial began several months after the investigation concluded. The prosecution charged the man with one of the most serious crimes, the premeditated murder of his wife. The courtroom was packed at the first hearing, attended by journalists, the victim's relatives, and city residents who had followed the case since the arrest. In his speech, the prosecutor presented a full picture of the events. He detailed the evidence: traces of blood in the house, the wife's belongings found, neighbors' testimony, a video recording from the store, and expert reports. Particular attention was paid to the forensic report. The injuries on the deceased body were consistent with multiple blows, and attempts to conceal the marks indicated deliberate action. The defendant's lawyer attempted to construct a defense based on an accident. He claimed that the quarrel had indeed occurred, but the husband had not intended to kill. According to the defense, the death was the result of an unintentional blow, and his subsequent actions were prompted by shock and fear of punishment. However, this theory was poorly consistent with the actual evidence. Witnesses testified in court. Neighbors confirmed hearing screams and seeing the defendant carrying out packages on the night of his wife's disappearance. One of them reported smoke coming from the yard. These testimonies added to the evidence. The children were the key witnesses. The judges decided to hear their testimony in camera to avoid further stress. In the presence of a psychologist, they testified that on the night of the murder, they heard loud bangs and their mother's screams, followed by silence. These words definitively supported the prosecution's case. Forensic experts presented a detailed report. Traces of blood were found on an object found in the garage, matching the deceased's DNA. The forensic examination determined that death was caused by multiple blows to the head and body, inflicted with particular brutality. This completely ruled out an accident. The defendant himself was shaky. He initially denied guilt, then admitted to an argument and an accidental blow, and later claimed to have lost control. His testimony was inconsistent, which left an unfavorable impression on the court. The prosecutor repeatedly pointed out inconsistencies, and each time the defendant was unable to provide a clear explanation. The victim's relatives stated that the woman never left the family without warning and could not have disappeared voluntarily. They demanded the maximum sentence, emphasizing that the defendant had deprived the children of a mother and destroyed an entire family. Local media actively covered the trial. Publications emphasized the widespread resonance of the case, with many discussing the problem of domestic violence and the fact that signs of domestic aggression had long been ignored. After reviewing all the evidence, the court found the man guilty of premeditated murder. The circumstances of the case, the presence of children, and the attempt to conceal the crime were aggravating factors. Mitigating circumstances were virtually non-existent, other than the admission of guilt at certain points. The sentence was harsh. The court imposed a lengthy sentence in state prison, several decades without parole for the first few years. The man was taken into custody right in the courtroom and sent to a correctional facility. The public hailed the verdict as fair. The victim's relatives expressed satisfaction with the court's decision, although they noted that no punishment could bring their loved one back. A guardian from among their mother's relatives was appointed for the children, ensuring they could continue their lives away from the tragic memories. Thus, the trial brought this high-profile case to a close. The man who escalated domestic conflicts to murder was punished, and the family story became an example of how hidden quarrels and aggression can end in irreversible tragedy. The court found the man guilty of murdering his wife and sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. The children were left without a mother and were given to relatives. The case received widespread public attention and became an example of how hidden domestic violence ends in tragedy.